Trevor, let's have you come on to stage, I guess we can say. And before we really get into our discussion, though, I just want to make sure I've introduced you and kind of let everybody know just how awesome you are. I had the privilege of meeting Trevor. It was kind of a funny story, actually. If anybody's heard of Code Ninjas, which is basically like a coding school, mostly for children, but some adults. They have brick and mortar buildings. It's like a franchise, and so you may find them here and there throughout the country, but we have quite a few of them here around where I am in Salt Lake. And I was just driving by one day and I was like, oh, that'd be really cool to interview someone from there. I have a podcast, and so I thought it'd be fun to have someone from Code Ninjas come and talk to us. And they gave me Trevor's number, but boy, did I feel like I hit the jackpot, because Trevor was just so knowledgeable and has an excellent background in so many different things. And it turned out to be truly, Trevor, it was like one of my absolute favorite episodes. So when I was organizing this month, I thought, oh, I have to have Trevor back. I just think he's so knowledgeable and has such a depth of information on this kind of discussion. So that's kind of the background of how Trevor and I met. But he is an education expert, and he has degrees in teaching, education, instructional media. He has been a co-founder and a founder for various education and consulting groups, specifically aimed at creating customized learning experiences for both children and adults. So kind of that whole spectrum. But like I said, he also worked at Code Ninjas. He was an area director for the company here in the Salt Lake region. And now he's working with companies and teams where he's largely like an AI consultant, an expert. So he's gotten a lot into AI. But yeah, Trevor, thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, I'm happy to be here.
Awesome. Well, I just want to jump right into it, because really I want to leave a little bit of time at the end as well for some Q&A. I think you just have, like I said, a great depth of knowledge, and I want to give our attendees a chance to kind of ask you some questions as well. But I did think it'd be a good question to start with say, how can organizations structure their training programs to improve code quality and reduce technical debt? Here we are, we want this whole month has been focused on quality. So what I'm trying to get at here is, how can a company or an organization just make a training program that will really bake in quality and get rid of that technical debt?
We'll start with the quality discussion, because I think technical debt has a little bit of a special extra that I would add to that. One of the biggest things I see, both whether it's for kids or looking at companies and their corporate level training, is that a lot of the issues that come up are based on a misunderstanding about what education really is. What's a learning environment that's successful? And a lot of us, because we went through a traditional school, where you go into a classroom and you sit and the teacher gives lectures and assignments, a lot of the development programs are built around that. There'll be a day workshop or somebody comes in for 3 hours. But realistically, when you look at true learning and an environment of human development where you're developing in the full picture, not just adding a few knowledge pieces, but implementation, working well with the team to make sure that it goes well. It's really not, the classroom is not a great analogy for that. It's really more like a garden. It's creating an environment that has all the elements you need for growth to happen. And so a lot of times the training programs are built to condense a huge amount of information into very short times, and then hope that that turns not only into something that's remembered well by each person, but then they somehow can implement and work in integrated ways with the other teams and players on their own teams successfully without any additional training on those aspects. And so if I was going to look at setting up a training program for the long haul to create a quality program at a company, we would actually be looking at the overall environment. How do we structure this into something that's given a lot more time and it's done in pieces? And then there's accountability, there's training, there's support, there's opportunities for interaction and discussion along the way. So essentially, if you're going to take, 12 hours in 2 days, it'd be better to do those 2 hours a week for 6 weeks, or 3 hours a week, or 4 hours a week, anything you can do. And it's the same thing for individuals when they're learning something. The more you try to cram, there are some people that have just such bright minds, they can retain everything. But for the most part, most people do better if they can tackle one area, practice it, rehearse it, make sure they really understand it at a deeper level, and then move on. And basically, the one last thing I just want to say on that to help people understand, one of the models I like to use in explaining like development of skills is one called the Dreyfus model of skill acquisition. And it's basically a 5-tier model that starts at novice and ends at expert. But the really interesting thing to me that I feel like is the most practical thing for anyone in charge of training programs or in charge of a company to be aware of is that there's actually 2 different levels where people tend to feel like they're an expert, which is interesting. And they're not the top 2 levels. Basically, the second tier up, there's novice, and then the next one's advanced beginner. And advanced beginner has as many people or more percentage-wise that feel like they're an expert than the actual expert level does. And basically, those first 2 levels are where people don't really know all the things that they don't know, right? It's like, I only have so much, so I know the things I know, and that's it. So once it's like, oh, I know there's these 10 things and I know them all, I can feel like I'm an expert, not realizing there's this whole other world to really reach expertise. And people that cross into that next tier start to realize all the stuff they don't know. So often when you talk to true experts, they do not describe themselves as an expert. They'll list all the things they still have to learn, or all the areas that they feel are still out there, and the network they have that helps them. So it's a big piece for individuals as they're developing, and especially for companies, is to really be able to start accurately assessing where people are on this transition, because it's easy to accept what people believe about themselves. And you'll have these advanced beginners that have all this cocky swagger. And so sometimes they'll move up the chain. If you've ever had a boss that you're like, how did they get above me? These guys are idiots, or whatever. It's often really that. It's like they have an overwhelming confidence because they never really learned what they don't know.
Yeah.
And so from the corporate level, accurate assessment of how do we recognize what actually counts as being in each tier, and how do we progress people successfully, rather than how do I put on a great one-day training.
Yeah. That's so, I have a lot of questions just stemming from that. In fact, I was having a conversation this morning about creating an environment where that pain is felt less, right? Like where, yes, you're supporting the learning and the growth over time, and not, like you said, cramming it into a short period of time. But then I guess like psychologically, how do you create an environment where people do feel that safety? So as they do improve their skills and they do start to realize more and more of maybe what they don't have, the imposter syndrome gets greater. How can we as leaders and everyday team members help to establish that culture where there is that safety and you can have that vulnerability without people feeling more stress and more anxiety than necessary? Like, have you found any advice or tips or tricks in that regard?
Well, one of the things that can be a starting point, and I think especially if you're not at the very top where you have final say, one of the biggest things, ironically, is that idea of strength in numbers. A lot of people don't realize how many people are more like them as opposed to the ones that are aggressive or tend to mock you if you make a mistake or get angry. So a lot of times if you start seeking out, like asking questions to find out who else actually does allow for a supportive environment, they want to learn also. They're willing to accept if you make a mistake or say something wrong without having to make fun of you or look down on you or get this whole superiority thing going. If you intentionally set up a way to seek that out, it's amazing how often you can get a team together, and there's a confidence when you have a whole collection of people. So that's one tip I have. That doesn't necessarily help with a boss who has unrealistic expectations, but in terms of if you've got a team of developers that are all working on projects, you might have a few that are very, cocky, aggressive, make you feel like an idiot or put you in an awkward position if there's a mistake or a question when you say, I don't know, I don't understand this part, can you help me? But if you learn that there's only 2 or 3 of them, the rest of you are supportive, it's a lot easier to ignore that person and keep seeking the information you need to be successful. Because if you hide being afraid of that challenge, you're not going to have the chance to learn and grow to actually become that top expert. Organizationally, it's really about spending a lot more time on the social interaction, the dynamic between people, because what I see a lot, especially at companies that have grown fast. So in the tech industry, you have a lot of these, it starts as a startup and suddenly between, some venture capital and stuff, they're exploding way beyond what they can really handle. A lot of times there's such a focus on attracting talent that they bring in people that are really quite toxic in their overall attitude and behavior. And anyone else who has good ideas and could help the company in the broader sense gets shut down or torn apart by some of these, mega personalities. So the willingness from on the leadership side to actually challenge that, and I'm going to use an example like a classroom because I think it's where we're used to seeing that kind of stuff. If there's a kid that's cocky and rude and insulting, you hope that the teacher is going to step in and, get control of the situation, help them calm down, remove them from the situation, encourage the rest to participate, hopefully develop the skill in that other child to become a healthy social interaction. Well, really, that's a part that is often missed in companies. Bosses don't want to deal with that part. They want to work on delivery dates and what technique is happening and who's responding. They spend a lot of time on marketing and client interaction because that's where the money is. But real strong production comes from addressing issues among the team and working to develop a good team dynamic and strong communication. And that actually is the big difference, I would say, looking specifically at technical deficit. The number of times I've been in with a leadership team where they're asking me basically, look, we need our team to be more accurate, more specific. They need to deliver on time. We need them to work together better. We don't want to do pay raises or spend too much on training, or it's like there's this unrealistic balance where they want the perfect worker in the perfect situation with full loyalty and top tier focus without any cost or sacrifice from their side. And I feel like on the technical deficit, a lot of times it's, you're looking at deadlines, and the realistic issue is you get a team that says, let's really focus on quality over rushing the delivery and risking this deficit. A lot of times the leadership is the one that creates that problem. So any of you that are on the leadership teams, the big thing I would say when I come into a company, that's the first thing I say is you need to take a look at yourself first, because a lot of times you don't have a structure in place that allows for safety. Do you have a mechanism where a team can say that the deadline is not realistic? Because if there was a planning session to say, okay, we do have this deadline, we can't move it. Let's strategically decide where we emphasize our time and what things we do essentially a little bit more rushed. That's a type of solution. Maybe we can delay it. Maybe we add some more team members short term. Like there's things that can be done, but a lot of times what really happens is it's handed down. So again, it comes to that culture and environment. If the culture is whatever the boss says, you better deliver or they're going to be mad, it's hard to make major changes. So again, there is things employees can do, but anyone here who's looking at it from the leadership and management side, that is actually the biggest area. And it's going to build a huge amount of trust and synergy in the teams. If they start realizing we can be honest about the dates, we can address what real concerns we have about how this has been laid out and bring up those concerns early, you can strategize around it and fix it. And they're going to be willing to do that and focus on quality rather than saying, look, the real dynamic of this company is rush. So of course there's going to be mistakes and they'll be mad, but there's no other option. So take a look in the mirror first for the leaders. Ask for feedback from the team. Say, hey, are the delivery times accurate?
Yeah. Oh, really good advice. Another thing that I wanted to follow up on from something you mentioned before was, and kind of from the developer's perspective now, so not so much leadership, but when we have these training programs, we talked about not doing them too rushed or too crammed, but from the learner's perspective, let's say you've had all these learning opportunities, your company does the workshops, they do the talks, whatever it is, they have someone come in from outside, they do a training with you. How can you then take that training, take that, what you've learned, and actually implement it so that it's not just kind of good for nothing. Like, oh, that's great information. I'm glad to know that. But back to how I was doing things before, what are some best practices that developers can really start implementing what they're learning?
I'd focus on two things you could do now, just I think probably the two highest impact areas. One is practice. And I know that sounds funny. It's like, we all know that. But what I see a lot when I'm working, when I talk to teams, when I say I want time to talk to a team without the bosses in the room, what I hear a lot is people saying like it was, there's so much expectation, there's all these things delivered and I can't keep up with it all. And when I ask if they do anything outside of work, like, well, that's not fair. They're asking me to do all this stuff. So basically what I would say is there are times when there's unreason, they want you to work 1,000,000 hours at home and you can't because of family. That's important to protect that. But there's also a part where it's developing yourself and your knowledge as a professional. And that's something where I feel like taking some extra time outside of maybe the work hours to say, I feel like this, if you recognize this is an area where if I get good at this, it's going to help my overall career. That's where you're investing in your future. So it's not just putting in extra hours for free for the boss. It's actually investment. And so when I discuss that with teams, there's a lot of times where they can point out the areas over the last year, like, man, if I had spent that little extra time on my own, spending a little time at home practicing or talking to some of my friends about it that are good at this, where I could get some feedback. That's one area. So being willing to separate out kind of resisting putting in extra hours for work that are free and saying this is about the development of me as a programmer can be helpful. The second thing is just skills of learning how to learn. One of the biggest things I feel like should be overtly taught anywhere where there's a learning thing is cognitive load theory, not the full scope of it because there's so much in there, but just some of the basic idea of when your working memory can only handle so much. So if you're working on a project or trying to take in new information, you can only hold 5 or 6 things in your mind, successfully at a time. And so if you're really going to get good at something, you have to learn how to create more space, essentially. So I like to use the analogy of driving. If you've ever worked with a driver, like a new driver, like a 15-year-old that's starting to learn or something, everything is a separate thing. Like a car coming and it's like they're hesitant, they're jumpy. It's kind of scary being in the car with them. So there's just so much to process when you're driving a car. Just the tools inside the car can be a lot. If you're in a parking lot, they're still having to think about stuff. And so then you add in movement. But those of us who have driven for a long time, it's like I can still carry on a conversation, maybe have music going, be thinking about other stuff and still handle all that stuff successfully. And the main thing there's some automation, essentially getting to where things are automatic. You don't have to think about them. But I think the bigger piece that I would emphasize, especially in this context of maximizing learning, is the idea of batching. And essentially, if you can attach something to something else, like when I'm driving, I'm not thinking of each thing specifically. It's like driving is this collective thing. So it can take up 1 or 2 places of those 5 or 6 I can hold, even though there's hundreds of things going on, because they've become this collective that are all associated together. So I can pull that whole in. So when you're learning a new skill or task, anything you can do to connect it to something you're already doing. So it could be that you're making links between some of the other things you've already done to find similarities. Sometimes it's thinking through how would I do this in the context of one project. So you're starting to see how it all connects and fits together. Basically taking some time out of your learning schedule to think through how can I put some of these pieces together to where they feel like they fit and they can become one item, because that's going to help you retain it dramatically longer. But it also helps you access that information in groups. So in multiple facets of the learning, it's going to help a huge amount to understand that.
Yeah. Oh, interesting. I really relate to that because as a teacher myself, a former teacher, even just connecting something new as you're teaching something new and introducing it, connecting it to something that students have prior experience with or interests in, tapping into what's called their schema, that helps the learning go so much more successfully because there's already that emotional connection to something. So as much as you can with something new, if you can connect it to something that you already have that connection to. It really, it makes it stick better, like you're saying. I also really appreciate what you were saying though about, yeah, it does take some time outside of your work schedule. It may cut into your personal time, but some things I've seen work really well, like as far as building your career and helping advance your skills in one sense, but just your network in another, are doing things like contributing to open source or writing articles. Medium.com has tons of articles, but that's a great way to take something that you're learning and to write an article about it, because as you're writing, you have to teach it. And we all know that teaching is the best way to learn. You have to know it so thoroughly that you're teaching it from every angle. So I don't know, I've just kind of found sometimes learning doesn't have to be just sitting down in front of the computer and watching a course. It can be creating content. And by so doing that, it's sort of cementing what you've just learned as you've done these trainings at work. So like we said there, but as you've trained companies, as you've worked with teams or employees, have you found any common pitfalls with the teams that led to poor code quality? And how can that be addressed through training and development?
Yeah, one of the biggest pitfalls that I see is when I talk to a company about what their goals are, there a lot of times there's a mix of some specific skills. We have this new release, or we have a new product line, or we need to, whatever it is, there can be specifics. But more often than not, the whole training or the whole area of need, or at least a big section of it, are things like problem-solving skills, teamwork, communication, leadership. There's a number of things along those lines. And if you look at it from, like, if you're going to talk to a learning engineer about the structure of how a human develops those, those aren't skills, they're traits. And how a trait is built is totally different than a skill. A skill you can have if you do a great learning progression and set up your strategic plan about here's how we're going to implement. Let's build. You have to know this first and then this. You're going to get there. Maybe it needs more time than's given. There's some things like that. But essentially that instructional process will allow anyone to develop that skill if they, given the right time. But traits are not, don't develop that way. You can teach all kinds of stuff in a classroom setting on leadership or problem solving, and everyone can have it memorized where they could pass a test with an A, and they can still demonstrate very few of those skills. Or even more commonly, they'll demonstrate it in one area and not in another area. And I'm sure you've all been in a situation where you're like, what is this person doing? They seem to be so smart, so logical, and they're doing this thing that makes no sense. It gets into an educational concept, a learning concept called transfer. And that's that a lot of the things that we learn don't automatically transfer to a new setting. It feels like they should, but without intentional processes of connection, it doesn't. So if I was going to work with a company on quality, I would be looking at three aspects. There would be the skills. What skills are missing and how do we build those? Again, a spaced out training program. The second one would be the environment. Are we creating an environment that actually values these things, or are we saying we value them, but all of our actual behaviors, procedures, boss decisions in the moment actually point to something else. But I think the biggest thing would be if you are needing more of these traits. Traits are developed by giving opportunity to work in it. So it's a process through experience, not a learning lessons. So if you're working on trait development, there should be almost no speaker getting up and presenting. There needs to be little bits of that, but it needs to be information on how it works, why it works, what the benefits to the company would be, how you can start developing it, and then giving people opportunities to do that. So give opportunities for extra communication and then assessments of that, some discussion, somebody that can actually analyze and say, hey, here's some things that could have gone better. Letting the team talk out what they would have, why they missed each other. And so trait development is actually a huge area I would focus on at the corporate level, because the soft skills are so essential for a team to really function well, but they're almost entirely skipped.
Mm.
It's like this assumption that everyone should be a great communicator. They should be a problem solver. They should be creative and curious and innovative. But how? Have they been given the training, the support, the mentorship? Because that's the biggest thing. Coaching and mentorship is probably the biggest support tool for trait development, where effective instruction and good pacing is what you would want for skill development.
Interesting. I like that. So mentorship training leads to quality code, essentially. Like as you go down, right? Leads to quality engineers leading to quality code. Huh. Okay. Then I have so many more questions for you. I always love talking to you, but I do want to leave some time for Q&A. So I'm going to ask one more. Um, oh, which one? Let's see. As you Okay, here's one I think that pertains a lot to our company. We've been doing a lot of hiring, but I don't think it's unique to Limble either. I think any company, when you bring on a new developer or new team members, everybody's coming in with their way of doing things, right? Their understanding of how to code, how to do things. So have you found a successful approach or strategy for maintaining high standards while also integrating those new team members? Like, how do you make sure that your process, your code isn't getting lost because maybe your teams are so focused on their projects, but knowledge isn't being transferred appropriately to the new team members? So how can we make sure that that is getting transferred as you're integrating new team members and maintaining that high standard?
I think that mostly comes down to communication, setting up a much more effective communication structure. And then secondly, recognizing the individuals and their traits and really working with them to understand and seek out buy-in. And if it's not there, deal with that. Programmers, in my experience, there's a higher percentage that enter a situation feeling like their way and their structure is right and the others are wrong. There's a certain level of confidence that comes along with the personality that successfully programs. And I've seen some places that want to stop that, but that's not actually a good idea, because that's actually a trait that helps programmers do what they do, to try to create what they're creating in these small teams. But having overt discussions about the fact that this is a trait and the fact that we want that in you, but we also have to align for the corporate value and to work as a team. I remember we were at a corporate Christmas party, and one of the leadership team had never really processed this. Like, he was having all these problems with the teams not interacting well, and lots of mistakes then, because a lot of miscommunication where both assumed that they were on the same track, and when they heard that they weren't, like, well, that means the other people are idiots. How could they possibly see it that way? That was the dynamic that's happening a lot. And we're at a Christmas party, and I found out they're doing a white elephant gift, and exchange where it's that, one person unwraps a gift and it's a kind of a gag gift, and then someone else can take the gift or open a new one. And it's such a silly little situation compared to a big project that you're producing for a company. But I actually told him to watch. I was like, here's my guess. Once you announce to the group that this is about to start, you're going to get into a big debate that borders on a fight over what the proper procedures are. And sure enough, about 20 minutes later, they sat down to do it, and they got into this fairly heated exchange from 4 different ways that white elephant gifts are supposed to be done. And there was no like, oh, that's a good idea, or that's fine. It's like, no, that's not a white elephant exchange. So there's this kind of rigidity. I was like, this is the natural state for a lot of people, because there is a confidence. They have researched it. They've been successful before. So you don't want to break that. But there needs to be overt conversations about the fact that this is present commonly, and then discuss it and say, look, our company needs uniformity to a point. We need interaction that's healthy. And so we need to figure out a plan together on how to reconcile these things, because if you have a team member that needs development training, that's different. But when you have people coming in that are already talented enough, but you're still not having the right fit with the company, those overt conversations are really the point. And often that's the last thing done. It's like we just keep trying to tell them to go back and do it again, or say we need something different, or we'll say this general, like send out a memo, we need more uniformity, remember our ways. But that doesn't actually address the real concerns that people have and the different mindsets that are the root of the decisions and the actions that are taking place. So it takes jumping into the middle of it, having the discussion, and anyone who truly is unwilling to participate as a team member, unwilling to see the needs of the company or the other teams, sometimes no matter how skilled they are, they maybe need to be removed from the team or put on projects where they can work more in isolation.
Interesting. Yeah. So basically just play white elephant with your new team members and
Yeah.
that's a funny story though. But well, okay. I really appreciate your thoughts. And I would love to have anybody from Limble who's interested in asking Trevor a question that could be related to learning, training, education, developer experience. But we'll kind of start with Limble, and then if nobody from Limble has a question, we can see if anybody else may have one. But just raise your hand here in Zoom and we'll go from there. I always have more questions as well, so we can do that. Joseph, it looks like you have one.
Yeah, I love the talk and the ideas in here. I'm just wondering what kind of resources that you would suggest to learn more or to get more skills around this kind of management training.
Yeah. Cognitive load theory, there's a number of books on that. The main thing I do is if you're looking at books, look for one that's accessible. Some of them are written in a very scientific, psychological manner. Some of them are written very technical, but more in terms of like the research side. And then some are very like written in common language. So find one that suits you. Looking at management things on teams, one of the ones that I actually like is one called 360-degree leadership. Even if you're not looking at leadership, the thing I like about that book, because I wouldn't say it's perfect personally, if anyone is a devotee, sorry, but what I like about it is the idea that the 360 is that it's all the way around you, so including up, like you lead even towards your bosses, essentially, is one of the big things, and then you're leading laterally. To me, what that's really saying is it's about communicating effectively. How do you help people understand your needs, communicate them clearly, try to get buy-in, those things that a leader should be doing from the top? How do you do that even if you're not at the top? If you're in the middle of a team and you've got people above you that aren't understanding. So that's one that I would start with.
I'm
Right.
particularly interested in the strong engineering mindset and helping people come to consensus when they're strong and knowledgeable. Yeah, that's a fun one.
Yeah. Well, the one thing I would say there especially for those that are needing to start having those conversations, there's two books, Crucial Conversations and Critical Conversations. If you haven't read those before, I think they're really helpful in how do you jump into a situation where it's probably going to go poorly. And, in the situations I've been in where we're taking those types of personalities, which usually they're more likely to be either on the leadership team or in developers. That's the two areas that I feel is the most common. Something that prepares you for how to go about entering a conversation that is important and probably going to go poorly. Those two books are really helpful.
And I kind of have a follow-up question as well, because we've talked a little bit about soft skills, but I'm curious, what are the key soft skills that separate great software engineering teams from average ones? You talked about how maybe there's not enough emphasis from companies on helping people learn these soft skills, but have you found any in particular that really elevate a team to go above being average?
I think if I was looking at a full team, the main thing I would look at, and I don't know if it's fully soft skill as much as maybe even mindset, but the idea of collaboration, we tend to commonly think of that in terms of like together. But that's not if you're talking about collaboration, the idea of just two people working together or a team doesn't fully capture what collaboration is really about. Collaboration also requires seeing each other as a respected source. So I'm not sure if equals is the right term, but like I respect your opinion. I see you as an expert or a valuable member of this team. Working on that dynamic is really hard because a lot of people are uncomfortable on teams. They're afraid someone's going to mess it up or take it a direction they don't go. They feel like somebody on the team's a weak link. So to me, the teams that work best are the ones that realize we as a group can accomplish more than we can on our own. And they know how to collaborate, not just where we all are on this project together, so we're all going to throw ideas, but we know how to actually listen to gain knowledge. I want to really hear what you're saying and why. I'm willing to let go of my side because I trust you. That to me is the biggest thing I would work on to really maximize a team that's already in existence.
Okay, I like that. We did just get a question here in the chat, and Michael is wondering if you have any suggestions on what to look for when interviewing candidates, or like for finding someone that would be a good fit for your team, or if there's any big red flags to look for.
The hiring side, the HR, I mean, I could spend so much time on this alone. So it's a whole nother branch. There's a lot there that I think could be done differently, and that I help when I'm working with a team, with a group to shape. I would say the biggest thing I would do, just like a fast thing to try to fit in here, is case studies. Give a scenario where you can see problems, or you've had problems come up, and have them answer it. And the biggest thing is a little bit of mind games. Make sure that it's not worded in a way where it leads them. Because a lot of people will say, you can already tell from the question what they want to hear, and people will say it. Instead, try to set it up in a very realistic way where the question is truly open-ended, because I've found that people have a natural ability, at least people who are good at interviews, of saying the right things. But what their actual behavior is so different. And case studies tend to really help that. So you give this scenario, you don't want to do a full case study, but like a little scenario that represents the types of things that you commonly run into, especially in problem areas. And then have them talk through what they would do, and make sure you keep a neutral face, just nod, stay professional, because you don't want anything to lead them, because that's the best chance. And the more time you have in an interview to do a few of those, the better, because it's amazing how often somebody who's a stellar candidate will really trip up once they're actually talking through how they'd handle specific situations. If you ask them to tell a story from their experience, they'll choose the best ones. But when you give them a scenario that you're concerned about, it often starts getting into their more natural, genuine reactions.
It's a great idea. I like that suggestion. Well, I'm going to ask you one final one, because I feel like with your current position, working a lot with AI, I think it would be amiss if I didn't ask you something related to that. So I would love to know, how can AI be leveraged to enhance team performance and code quality in software development? Do you have any ideas for that?
Well, with the code quality, there's definitely a lot of tools out there. I've heard a lot of mixed results on whether people love them, hate them, feel morally against them. But, there are all kinds of tools that help in different branches. You can have things that help with sprint reporting. They can help with, code assessment. You can do all these things. They're not perfect. That's one thing I would just say. AI still makes mistakes, so people haven't used it much. But in this case, with what we've been talking about, I feel like the bigger thing that's missed is how it could help on the team dynamic and communication. Not everyone is going to be a natural good communicator. And so even though it's an essential part of being a team, you can't train every single person to be magnificent at it. So using, even just an LLM, a ChatGPT 4.0 or something, where if you have something that you need to communicate, asking for the tone, say like, here's the tone I want. Because a lot of times people don't recognize their own tone. So, and here's the things I want to convey. Can you give me a few options here? Because a lot of times it's kind of like if you had, to me, the best use of AI in this case is not think of it doing it for you, which is what a lot of people think of. It's like having a team that you can bounce ideas off. It's your accountability team. So you can get these different reactions, and all of a sudden you're seeing a whole different way of phrasing things that you might not have thought of, that can help you communicate more thoroughly, or can help you phrase things a little bit more supportive and respectfully. That's a huge part of it. there's also tutoring aspects. If you have an area that you don't understand, it depends on which area. There's things that are probably too technical, but it's worth a try asking. I need to learn about this. I need to know it, but I don't want you to give me all the answers. Like, can you tutor me on this? And so it depends on which skill and which area. You have to test to see if it's legitimate. But that's an area that I've seen more and more places able to use as the models expand. The other thing that I've actually found, and this is actually something I'd say for the leadership team in particular, but for anyone, is ask an AI to help you with Socratic method. And basically every answer you give, it'll give you a bunch more questions to think about. So I feel like it's really good in refining your thinking, refining your thoughts. So for example, we were talking earlier about unrealistic expectations. If you said, I have a deadline for a team, but I want to make sure that I've thought through how to make sure I'm giving this a fair amount of time, whatever your situation is, spell it out and then say, using the Socratic method, can you help me? And basically it'll ask you a bunch of questions and you can respond to those questions. It won't assess or respond. It'll just give you a bunch more questions. And I've sat with leadership teams and run them through a scenario like that, where just going through 5 or 6 layers of questioning, they're like, all of a sudden they've thought of stuff they never would have come up on their own. Because even a big group can still fall to groupthink. There's traditions, there's habits, there's all these things that can come into play even with a group. So it's easy to fall into a pattern and not see the bigger picture. So I know those aren't the normal AI areas people look at. They want to look at all the specialty tools that are specific to the industry. But because so much of the biggest challenges isn't with the skills, it's with the overall dynamic and how the interactions and communications happen, that's where I would start.
That's fascinating. I like that because I think as much as Scrum and Agile are great like processes for running things, I think sometimes you do get in that rut of just doing, this is this meeting, so we run it this way. But I think maybe going about it and going through this Socratic method maybe before those meetings start, but just to kind of get your thoughts going, I think it'd be really helpful, and you could bring those thoughts to your meeting and really add some depth to it that otherwise, like I said, maybe you're just kind of going through that rut, but going through the motions, I guess. So yeah, that's fascinating. I love that. But awesome. Thank you so much, Trevor. As I said, I'm always just so energized when we talk, and I love your ideas and thoughts. So appreciate you being here.
For